The private dining room at the gig at dusk held 14 people and a view of the Tennessee River that my father had specifically requested when he made the reservation. He liked backdrops. He understood that the right setting made a moment feel earned. I was sitting 3 seats down from Ella, with my mother between us and an empty chair beside me, where Ella's boyfriend had been supposed to sit before they broke up 2 weeks prior. Nobody had rearranged the place settings. I had my phone in my lap, screen angled away from the table, watching a $6,200 payment to Whitfield Cold Storage clear my linked business account. The ACH transfer had initiated at 4:00 p.m., the way it always did on the 15th, automated and quiet. Ella had signed the warehouse lease in her name. The payments came from mine. My father stood when the dessert menus arrived, which was his signal that a speech was coming. He did it at every occasion, stood a half second before anyone expected it, so the room had to catch up to him. He had a glass of Malbec, and he held it the way people hold things they want others to notice. He talked about resilience. He talked about what it meant to build something from nothing in a city that rewarded the people willing to show up and do the work. He talked about watching his younger daughter take an idea and turn it into a functioning business. 12 employees, a fleet of 3 refrigerated vans, contracts with 4 regional distributors. He said the word self-made without any hesitation, and the word landed in the room the way he intended it to. With weight, with approval, with the specific gravity of a man who had built his own contracting business from a single truck and considered that origin story the central fact of his identity. Ella smiled the way she always smiled when my father talked about her, not modestly. She had stopped performing modesty years ago, which I had come to understand was not arrogance so much as the natural posture of someone who has never had to examine the gap between the story and the facts. The room applauded. My father looked around the table with the particular satisfaction of a man who has arranged the world correctly. Then he looked at me. "Haley," he said, "you must be so proud of your sister." I set my phone face up on the table. The banking app was open to the transfer screen. I tapped cancel on the Whitfield payment. The status changed from processing to canceled while the table watched, though most of them didn't know yet what they were watching. "I've been funding it," I said, "for 18 months. The applause had already stopped. The room went the specific quiet of people deciding whether to pretend they hadn't heard something. Ella laughed. It was a real laugh, not a nervous one. She genuinely found it dramatic. "Haley, come on." I turned my phone toward her. I read the next 4 scheduled transfers out loud. Whitfield Cold Storage, $6,200, canceled. Progressive Commercial Fleet Insurance, $1,840, scheduled for the 17th. Route For Me Dispatch Software Subscription, $290, scheduled for the 18th. Payroll Bridge Transfer for the November cycle, $11,400, scheduled for the 20th. "Do you want me to continue the subscription?" I said. She stopped laughing. My father put down his wine glass. I told the table to enjoy the celebration. I picked up my phone, picked up my bag, and walked out through the main dining room and into the parking lot on the riverside, where the November air came off the water cold and direct. My hands were shaking by the time I reached my car. I stood beside the driver's door for a moment, not getting in, watching the lights on the walking bridge reflect in strips across the river. Then I got in and drove home. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in the South Side, on the 3rd floor of a building that had been a textile warehouse in a previous version of the city. The ceilings were high, and the radiators were loud, and I had lived there for 4 years because the lease terms were stable, and I didn't want to move again. I got home at 9:40 p.m. I made coffee I didn't need and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and the folder I had been maintaining since the previous April. The folder was not organized for drama. It was organized the way I organized everything at work, by date, by category, by amount. There were 18 months of bank statements with the relevant transfers highlighted. There were copies of the Whitfield lease, the Progressive policy, the Route For Me subscription confirmation, and the 3 payroll bridge emails where Ella had texted me the shortfall amount and I had sent the transfer before noon the same day. There was a spreadsheet. The total at the bottom, was $94,340. I had built the folder because I needed to know that the thing happening was real. That is the most honest accounting I can give of my reasoning. It was not built for deployment. It was built so I could open it at 11:00 p.m. when I couldn't sleep and confirm that the number was the number, that I had not miscalculated my own life. I canceled the Root for Me subscription. I canceled the Progressive Auto-Renew. I sent a 30-day notice to Whitfield on Ella's behalf because the lease terms required it, and I did not want her to lose the security deposit on top of everything else. I didn't owe her that, but I did it anyway, which is either a character flaw or a habit I haven't finished breaking. In the memo line of the final internal transfer record, the one I moved to a closed column in the spreadsheet, I typed 6 words, not imagining it. Done. Moving on. Then I closed the laptop and sat in my kitchen until almost 2:00 a.m., not thinking about much. The radiator knocked. A car alarm went off outside and stopped. I washed my coffee cup and went to bed. Mia had the desk across from mine and the particular gift of listening without reorganizing what she heard into something more comfortable. She was in the middle of a system audit when I came in the next morning, and she looked at me the way she looked at flagged line items, briefly, precisely, without comment, and then went back to her screen. At lunch, she asked me how the dinner had gone. I told her, not all of it and not in order, but enough. She ate her sandwich and didn't gasp and didn't say, "Oh my God," and didn't tell me what she would have done. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How long did you know you were going to do it?" she said. I didn't have an answer for that. I had thought I was building the folder for proof, not for anything actionable. I had thought I was being careful, which was the thing I was best at. I told her I wasn't sure. "But you brought your banking app to the dinner," she said. She wasn't accusing me of anything. She was just identifying the fact. I thought about that for the rest of the week. I thought about it on the drive home Thursday night and again Friday morning when Randall stopped by my desk to ask how the compliance documentation for the Hendricks Group review was coming. And I told him on track, and he nodded with the particular relief of a manager who has learned to rely on certain people and is regularly grateful that they haven't left yet. I thought about Mia's question during that conversation too, which is not a comfortable thing to sit with. The idea that you have been preparing for something for longer than you consciously know. My mother called on Sunday. She didn't leave a message. She called again Monday evening, and this time I picked up, and she told me my father wanted to have a family meeting at the house on Signal Mountain on Wednesday. She said she thought it would be good for everyone to sit down together. I said I'd be there at 7. I printed the folder contents at work on Tuesday, 43 pages, paper-clipped in 4 sections, tucked into a manila envelope. I was not going to the meeting to present evidence. I was going because not going would have required a different kind of energy than I had, and because I knew that whatever was going to be said needed to be said in a room and not over text message threads. The house on Signal Mountain was the house I had grown up in. My father had built the back deck himself, which he mentioned with some regularity. My mother had furnished the sunroom with things she found at estate sales across 3 counties, and the result was a room that looked inherited rather than assembled, which was the effect she had been going for. I had always liked the house better than I liked what it meant to be in it. Ella was already there when I arrived. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the expression of someone who has pre-selected a position and is waiting to occupy it. My father was in his chair in the living room. My mother was doing something in the kitchen that didn't need doing. We moved to the dining room table. I put the manila envelope on the table and left it there. My father started to say something about how he hoped we could approach this as a family, and I opened the envelope and set the first section in front of him. The bank statements, 18 months, the highlighted rows. He picked them up. He was a man who had run a contracting business, which meant he was comfortable with numbers, which meant there was no cushion of ignorance to soften what he was reading. Ella started talking. She said the word help several times. She said she had always intended to repay it. She said that things had been moving quickly and there had never been a right moment to explain the structure of the arrangement to people who might not have understood it. The explanation had the shape of something she had prepared, but the texture of something she was constructing in real time, and the gap between those two things kept widening the longer she talked, until eventually she stopped talking and the room was quiet. My father was still holding the bank statements. I did not raise my voice once. I did not need to. I told him what the total was. I told him the date the transfers had started and what had precipitated them, and that I had never asked Ella to call them anything other than what they were. I told him that I had not expected a toast. I had expected, at some point, for someone to notice. He put the statements down. He looked at Ella. He did not look at me. I left the manila envelope on the table and drove back down the mountain. Ella posted something 4 days later. It was vague in the way that posts about betrayal are vague when the person posting knows they cannot be specific without revealing what actually happened. She used the word family 3 times and the phrase those who were supposed to have your back once. She tagged a quote about loyalty. Bethany Cole had been her operations coordinator for 8 months before she left in August. Bethany commented one sentence beneath the post. Funny timing considering what I found out this week about who actually kept the lights on. The comment had 47 likes before Ella deleted the post. Screenshots had already made it into the family group chat, sent by 2 of our cousins, by the time the post came down. I did not respond to the group chat. I did not respond to the 3 text messages from aunts. I did not call Ella. I put my phone in my bag and went for a walk along the Riverwalk and looked at the water for a while, which is not a symbolic action but simply what I did. My mother arrived at my apartment on a Saturday morning without calling ahead. I saw her car from my kitchen window when I was making eggs. I let her in. She stood in my entryway with her coat still on and said she didn't have a speech prepared, which was not something my mother usually admitted, because admitting it was the same as admitting that she had arrived without a strategy, and strategy was how she survived our family. We sat at my kitchen table. I gave her coffee. She said she had known, not about the specific amounts, but she had known that something was wrong with the picture Ella presented, that something wasn't adding up, and she had not asked because asking would have required her to do something with the answer. It was the most honest thing she had said to me in several years. She didn't apologize in words, exactly. What she did was look at me and not look away, which was its own kind of apology. I told her I wasn't angry with her. That was true, mostly. The feeling I had about my mother was less like anger and more like exhaustion at having spent years managing her comfort while she managed everyone else's, a closed loop that had never had room in it for what I actually needed. The conversation didn't resolve everything. She left an hour later, and I stood at my window again and watched her car back out of the spot, and I felt something that wasn't relief and wasn't grief, and was probably closest to the experience of having said a true thing out loud in a room for the first time. I went to the Signal Mountain house one more time. This was 6 weeks after the dinner. Ella was there. My father had asked her to be there, which was something he had not done before, asked instead of arranged. It was a small difference. I brought a single page this time. I had written it in the compliance format I used at work, clear sections, defined terms, explicit expectations. It was not a legal document. It was a record of what I would and would not do going forward, written in plain language so there was no room for subsequent reinterpretation. I set it on the coffee table when I arrived and did not explain it. Ella had run out of explanations by then. What she had instead was a kind of flatness, not contrition, not quite, but the specific affect of someone whose story has collapsed around them and who has not yet built a new one. She didn't look like the person who had smiled at my father's toast. She looked smaller and more real. My father spoke to her directly that afternoon. I don't know exactly what he said because I had stepped into the hallway when it started, not as a performance, but because it was not mine to witness. I heard his voice, low and measured, which was not a register I associated with him. I heard Ella say something I didn't catch. When I walked back into the room, my father was looking at the one-page document I had left on the coffee table. He hadn't picked it up. He was reading it where it lay. I said goodbye and walked out the front door while he was still reading. The business closed in January. Ella sold the Rolex she had bought herself in August to cover a final payroll obligation, which Bethany told me later, not as gossip, but as a straightforward fact she thought I should know. Ella took a floor supervisor position at a third-party logistics company outside of Cleveland, Ohio, which was either irony or instruction, depending on how you looked at it. She enrolled in a 12-week cash flow management course through the Community College Extension Program. I know this because my mother told me, not because Ella told me. I finished my Certified Compliance and Ethics Professional examination in February and passed on the first attempt. Randall sent me an email that evening with the subject line "well done" and 2 sentences in the body, which was effusive by his standards. The promotion came in March, a senior analyst position with oversight of 2 junior staff, and a salary increase I did not negotiate against because the number was already fair. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the North Shore in April, with windows that faced the river and enough closet space that I stopped storing things in the hallway. It was a small improvement in the physical conditions of my life, and I was not embarrassed by how much it mattered. In May, a Venmo notification arrived from an account I didn't immediately recognize. The amount was $200. The note on the transfer said, "Starting here, Ella." I stared at it for a moment. $94,340, $200. I was not unaware of the math. I accepted the transfer and typed my reply, "Received. Okay." That was the end of it, and also not the end of it, which is the most accurate way I know to describe what a family is after everything has been said, and the room has gone quiet, and everyone has walked back to their separate lives carrying whatever they're carrying. I closed the app and set my phone on the counter and looked out my new windows at the river, which was running high and brown and indifferent, the way it always was in spring.